Morning, everybody. How we doing today? First thing I want to talk to you about is something interesting I've discovered in the last 6 months to a year. Bethlehem, one of my favorite jazz labels, one of the coolest, hippest jazz labels, one of the coolest album covers, some of the coolest modern jazz that people don't talk about or know about. Bethlehem has been reissued by Fresh Sound out of Spain, some of it. And as I was collecting the Bethlehem discography back in 2018, 2019, which I just finished the last few pieces the last 6 months, but I had most of it by probably 2019. Some titles were tough to come by. A lot of them are pretty rare. I bought some Fresh Sound titles. And they do a decent job. They sound fine. They don't sound as full to me maybe as the originals. But I'm not super into comparing pressings. That's not what I do. And I rarely buy multiple copies of a record. However, the one thing I've always made an exception for is if I have a reissue of something and I do find an original that's at a good price, I'll sometimes spring for it and grab the original. And in the last year, without really trying to look for them, I've stumbled on probably 6 or 7 original Bethlehems to replace the Fresh Sound titles that I found. And most of my Bethlehems are originals. I probably only have a dozen Fresh Sounds. So I've almost replaced all my Fresh Sound titles at this point. Some of my titles are Japanese as well. The Japanese have also done some of them. For example, what we're listening to right now is this fantastic Claude Williamson LP, who was a great West Coast pianist. Does some great stuff at Capitol. He's a big part of that whole West Coast scene. I'm a big fan of Claude Williamson and his brother Stu. Again, this is a nice Japanese pressing. However, when I was shopping the other day, I've taken a shopping in Discogs by just doing a year search. 1950, so the 10 inches are included, through 1967, 65, depending on my mood, depending on how big their library is. If the guy's only got 60 records, I'll look at everything. But if he's got 2,000 jazz records, I'll narrow it down by year. And having done that, I was always searching by label before. And so once I was done with Bethlehem, I kind of stopped searching Bethlehem. I wasn't really finding Bethlehem titles. And I wasn't looking. But once I started just searching someone's jazz collection for sale by year range, that 15, 16 year span includes the entire catalog of Bethlehem. And since I've been doing that, I have stumbled on a lot of old original Bethlehems for a steal. And that's what I'm trying to let you know here, is if you're patient, Bethlehem is just anonymous enough that even the average record seller doesn't value or see the collectability in Bethlehem the same way as they do with Prestige and Blue Note and even Riverside. So they kind of slip under the radar for certain sellers. And, you know, some of the Mingus, some certain names might demand, and some Bethlehems do go for pretty good money online. However, there are certain sellers, and if the guy has a Kiss avatar, you want to look at his jazz records. You know, if he's got Black Sabbath and Ozzy in his little avatar, you want to see what he's got for jazz records. The less the guy cares about jazz records, the less likely he is to know what a Bethlehem is. So that's always a good piece of insight. What's his avatar? If it's John Coltrane, by the same token, his jazz records are probably going to be expensive because he knows his jazz canon. So anyway, I found a lot of cool old Bethlehems for under 20 bucks. And I'm a guy that I just can't not grab the old when I have a chance to. I think I got this one for $7. Original Claude Williamson DJ sample copy, BCP number 54, and the Japanese pressing was fine, and I would have been just fine with that. But when I had a chance to grab this for $7, and this is the most recent one I found. What I've come to realize though is it is a bit of a trend, and that if you're patient, you can find the old Bethlehems for a great price. This one is the Joe DeRise record, and this is an original pressing, but it's got the masking tape, and this is just a chance I got a second one that's air conditioned, and that was probably 12 bucks. And again, it's not something I do very often, but Bethlehem's are just a special place for me. This is a fresh sound copy of Teddy Charles' Salute to Hampton. Teddy Charles, of course, one of the great West Coast vibraphone players, and he's acknowledging one of the greatest of all time, Lionel Hampton. It's a fine little record. It's almost ignorable on this Fresh Sounds repackage. It's just, it's got the modern, it doesn't feel, and when I found the original of that, it just feels so much more hip, so much cooler. Number 6032, so this is after King is influencing what's happening at Bethlehem quite a lot. It's actually a stereo pressing with the blue, and you don't see very many stereo Bethlehem records, honestly. It's a pretty mono-dominated red label experience. This is a record I bought years ago when this came out. I think it was a Get Back reissue, probably 15 years ago at least. And then I stumbled on an original of this for a good price. And this was maybe it was 25 bucks. And for Mingus, that's a pretty good price for an old Bethlehem. It's an interesting record. If you like doing crossword puzzles and wearing a beret and sitting in a park bench in New York and feeling rather sophisticated, I like some obscure music with lots of fascinating, intricate parts and spoken word, darling. I like spoken. This is a cool record. It's meant for the beret set. Not quite the jet set. It's a little bit more intellectually driven. Mingus had some interesting chapters in his career, no question about it. And again, it's not the best condition. There's some tape on the top. But again, the original versus the kind of sterile reissue. This is the Lush Life record here by Russ Garcia. And Russ Garcia is a fantastic conductor and arranger. He leads some fantastic records and arranges some fantastic stuff. If you see Russ Garcia on a record, that's going to be a very jazz-oriented ensemble and production and arrangement, not like some of the Hollywood orchestras and the West Coast studio orchestras that would create very poppy ensembles, and the jazz would be kind of melted out. Russ Garcia's productions and arrangements are always very jazz-oriented and usually contain a host of the best West Coast talent. And if we look at this one, for example, Russ Garcia is a conductor with Frank Rosalino, Herbie Harper, Tommy Pedersen, Maynard Ferguson, Stan Levy, Red Mitchell, Marty Peisch, and Dick. It's solid stuff. So again, when I found an original, I couldn't really pass it up. And then two more to show you here. Max Bennett on Fresh Sound. Meh, it's alright. I would have been fine with it, and I lived with it fine for 2 years. When I found this one, I think I paid $8 for it. Beautiful old cover, beautiful old logo. That Bethlehem logo is one of the prides of the jazz kingdom, if you ask me. And this is Max Bennett's other LP, BCB 48. Again, I think it's Japanese pressing. Oh no, it's probably Fresh Sound. And here we go. That's the original right there. There's that beautiful Bethlehem logo. And again, it says DJ sample copy. Beautiful stuff. And you just can't make it up. The originals are just so cool. Carl Fontana, Mel Lewis, Dave McKenna, Charlie Mariano, Jack Nimitz, and Nick Travis. It's cool as you become deeper a collector, how less and less names are unfamiliar to you on records. I know most of those names have records by most of those guys at this point. So the point of that whole segment here is if you're looking for Bethlehems, be patient, because they are out there. They sold moderately well for a jazz label that was independent in the mid-50s. It was selling to kind of white Ivy Leaguer college kids who went to see Brubeck and Oberlin, like those kind of kids. They were digging Bethlehem and buying those Bethlehem records. They knew the Shorty Rogers groups. They knew Stan Kenton stuff, orchestra, and all those people. And so they were just excited at the opportunity to buy these Bethlehem records, buy these solo records by these great musicians that were hip, not really well promoted or nationally distributed. So if you were in Harvard, darling, hanging out at Harvard Square, and you had a couple new Bethlehem, you were cool. Stu Williamson, that guy's dope. I know, I've heard of him. So Bethlehem is a special place, and they are out there. And you can get a Bethlehem original if you're patient for under 20 bucks, under 10 bucks sometimes. Sometimes I see them, I'm like, really, $6 for that? I can't say no to it. And that's not the case for old Prestige. You'll find beat up Sonny Rollins old Prestige records, sometimes without a cover, and the guy still wants 200 bucks for it. You know? And these maybe have some cosmetic issues, but they all play just fine. So Bethlehem, always worthy to grab, and they're out there for a good price if you're patient and don't mind, you know, spending your time digging through. If you're impatient like I am, and you just want to fill that in and get to know it, you'll end up buying a copy from Japan and paying for the shipping. And I'm finding out now you don't have to with Bethlehem. You know, they're probably not even as rare as Savoy are. A lot of Savoy are very rare. Moving on to the second part of my segment today, I want to talk about 10 records that I would really like, excuse me, I got allergies right now, that I would really like to see get reissued. And this is going to be a very self-indulgent list from my sake. These are 10 records that I would like to see reissued because I can't find them. The originals are going for too much. If there's a Japanese pressing, they're also really rare. There's a few things I've found recently, like the Dizzy Reese Savoy record. That needs a reissue. It's so hard to find. Originals go for big bucks. And the thing about this list, there's a lot of records I could have said, oh, I want that reprinted. But I know that no one else but me is looking for it. So that one Argo record I can't find by Cesar, what's his last name? I can't think of his last name. Giovannini. Cesar Giovannini. No one's going to reissue that because only a guy completing the Argo discography is going to be looking for it. And I can't find an original to save my life. I had a chance to bid on one that was a white promo with a colored vinyl, actually. It's the only one I've ever seen. I've only bid like $27 and lost it. I didn't think anybody else was looking for it. So I bid too low. I've never seen one with the cover. Never. But I can find Google images of the cover, so it has to be out there. You know, if you can't Google image something and Discogs doesn't have a record of it, that record's probably not out there. You know, I have been looking for records that Discogs didn't have yet. There's some Bethlehem early stuff that Discogs didn't have at the time. That stuff's slowly all getting filled in as we go forward. But these are records that I think if someone reissued them, there would be a demand for them and they would sell pretty well. I'm not going to speculate as to who owns said type licensing right now. We're not going to see any Blue Notes here. Blue Notes obviously being covered by Tone Poet and Music Matters and Infinite 75th and 80th anniversary. All Blue Notes being covered. You know, and the Impulse is getting redone. Verve, some of that stuff's getting redone. These are going to be more in between the crack things that I would like to see done. Again, personally, because I want them, but also because I think people would buy them. So I think it's an interesting list. And if one of you has one of these records and wants to part with it, happy to make an offer on it, or you could offer it to me, and I'll see if I'm willing to pay what you want. Number one on my list, Woody Shaw, The Blackstone Legacy. It's a record I used to see in stores, semi-regular, and I was always attracted to the cover. It's got that kind of National Geographic look. It's just that cool photography. It seems to tell a story. And it does have an ethnic, racial component to it. It just feels like... and I always passed it up. I didn't really know who Woody Shaw was that well until a few years ago, after the record had become really rare. It's on Contemporary. It's number... where'd it go? 7627. So the same as 3627. 36 would be the mono. There probably isn't a mono that late. So 7627. I know Contemporary mostly from the 3500 numbers, but just the old mono numbers. But Contemporary is a great label. I know they were part of OJC for a long time. It's a double record, which is part of the issue. There has been reissues of it over the years. Numerous, 6 or 7 probably different reissues of it on vinyl. Yet it's still super rare and still going for hundreds of dollars for a relatively late record on a relatively big label. So I think Blackstone Legacy deserves another reissue. Whoever owns that, put it out. I know I'll buy it. I'm sure a lot of people would, because again, the demand for it seems pretty high at this point. And Woody Shaw's star seems to be kind of rising in collectors' eyes from my perspective. Number 2 on my list, Charlie Rouse on Epic. Yeah. I have been looking for that record for a long time. I've bid on it on eBay numerous times. Anything that's an old Epic yellow label goes for hundreds. One just went last weekend for like $640. My wife saw me watching it. It was in the 600 somethings. And she's like, "You're not bidding on that, are you?" I'm like, "No, I'm just seeing where it ends up at." And that record, again, has been issued in Japan. Classic Records did it. Even the Classic Records reissues are going for $100, $120. It's hard to find that record for an affordable price. I've been looking for it for 2 years. Lost every auction I've ever been on it. And I just haven't found one that was in the right price point for me at the right time. And I'm really the guy that wants to spend $120 on something when I can get 10 other records for that same price that I'm still looking for. It's one thing when I'm down to like the last 2 or 3 titles by a label, then I'm like, oh, I really want to finish that off. But Epic is such a weird label. It's got classical, it's got some pop and rock and R&B. It wasn't just a jazz label, so it wasn't like there's going to be the completion of this label for me at any point for Epic. But Epic does have a great string of jazz titles. There's also another Charlie Rouse Epic with Selden Powell, which I'd also like to get a hand on at some point. It's one of those dual side things. They each have their own side, probably from earlier sessions, were probably 10 inches or something. I haven't come across that one either. That one I see more affordable. But if some domestic label put that out right now at a good price, $25, $30, I know I would scoop that up for sure. Number 3 is Melba Liston. And Melba Liston is one of the great trombone players. People don't really remember Melba. She's a fantastic arranger. People hired her often as much for her arranging and throwing down at sessions. She doesn't do a lot as a leader. She's a great trombone player. One of the great females in jazz is Melba Liston. She had a record on Metro Jazz, which was a subsidiary of MGM. MGM starts a record label to put out its film soundtracks. They start doing a few jazz titles on the MGM label. They launch Metro Jazz as their little jazz subsidiary. There's only 15 titles on that label. They're all great. I have all of them except for the Melba Liston. And the Melba Liston goes for over 100, 120, 150, $200. There's a few on Discogs right now. Again, it's just a lot for a trombone record that it's probably going to cook, but my budgets don't really cook like that. I don't really got the money to drop $120 on a record that I'll listen to a few times here and there. It needs to be reissued. Someone put out that Verve Metro Jazz. It was a part of MGM. So whoever owns that library, put out that Melba Liston record. Put it up for $26 and watch people buy it. I know it would sell. Teddy Edwards, again a contemporary pressing, again a bit of a later contemporary into the 60s, number 7592, which is also 3592. The contemporary sequence starts at 3500. So this is the 92nd release in the contemporary discography, putting it a good 5-6 years into their LP sequence. So I have probably almost all of Teddy Edwards' work, to be honest. He does some great records at Pacific. He does some great records at Contemporary. Most of them have OJC titles enough so that they don't get too high in price. And some of them will climb up there, but they're never, the hundreds of dollars that Good Gravy is going for right now. And it's one I've seen before at better prices and passed on, and now it's just, again, the prices are getting so crazy for so many jazz records. I'm not crazy about the cover, which is one of the reasons why I've passed on it before, because I think I'm like, I'll buy this instead. I'll find that later. You think you'll find Blackstone Legacy. You think you'll find Good Gravy. And now you're getting down to the last few contemporaries you need, and you can't find them. I'm almost completed the first 100 contemporary. I have probably about 120 contemporary total, including my 10 inches and stuff from the 3600 series, 7600 series. But there's those two titles I'd both love to get a hand on, and I can't come across them affordably. So if you're going to put out Blackstone Legacy, put out Good Gravy as well. $25, $30, people will buy that. Whoever's in charge of that. Dave Bailey, a great drummer who has 3 great records at Epic that are tough to find, but those have been reissued. Foot in the Gutter, those 2 Feet in the Gutter, those records are outstanding. They do have domestic reissues that are out there that keep some of the costs down on buying those records. But Dave Bailey makes 2 records for Jazzline, Jazz Time. It's the same label. It had to change its name for a lawsuit. They only put out about 4 or 5 records. There's a great Duke Pearson on Jazzline. But there's 2 Dave Bailey. One's called Bash and one's called Reach Out. And like I said, they're both on the same little label, even though the label had to change names in between these 2 titles. There only might be 3 or 4 titles on this label. I can't find either of those records for any good price. They're in Japan, but they're expensive in Japan. You know, they're not coming cheap. And the shipping from Japan right now is really outrageous because of COVID and all that's going on. What used to cost $12-20 to ship right now is costing $40, $50, $60 sometimes. And that just makes the price of a record double. You know, you might have it for $60, but that $60 shipping on top, it's like, ouch. So I think if someone wanted to put those 2 records out, and the Duke Pearson one was reissued not that long ago, and that's how I got that one. I think Jazz, who did it? Wax Time maybe did the Duke Pearson. And I think those records on those budget labels are great. I'll be happy to buy any of these records I have mentioned on a budget label. If it's got the original album cover, and I don't care if it comes from a digital source, I just want to hear it and have it and know it. That's what I care about. It's like you're missing an episode of a book. You want to know the story. You don't care about how you read the book and what the paper was on. You don't care about, oh my God, I had to read that one digitally, or it was on a paper that was inferior to the original book. It's so silly how much people talk about that and not the music, not the story behind the music. So I'd be happy to buy any of these on Wax Time or any of those budget labels, as long as they have the original album cover. That's important to me. So those Dave Bailey records are both great. The sextet, I think one's a quintet, if I remember. Great lineups, fantastic hard bop, fantastic stuff. Would love to come across those. Number 7 is Bill Barron on Savoy. Most of you who know my channel know I have almost all the Savoy records from 12,000 all the way through 12,150. There's only one title in that 150 records I don't have, and it's that Stablemates record with his one side is Yusuf Lateef, the other side is slipping my mind right now. Another one of those Muslim names. It's slipping my mind. Anyway, pause. But that Stablemates record, I want that bad, and I even pay $100 for it to finish off my Savoy. But I don't think it should be reissued. You know, the Japanese have done it, and they will reissue complete discography sometimes. But I don't think enough people want this split dual record with Sahib Shihab on the one side. It's none of those Muslim cats. It's just slipping my mind right now. But the Yusuf Lateef always has some desirability. But there's other Yusuf Lateef records on Savoy that you should reissue that I have already way before Stablemates. So Stablemates isn't on my list. But post 12,150, Savoy starts changing their trajectory into more gospel, some spoken word, some weird stuff. But there's also some weird avant-garde, unknown stuff that creeps in the late 160s, 170s, 180s. And a lot of that stuff's really rare. Savoy was a pretty prominent label in 1955, 56, 58, 59. By the 60s, Savoy's output's diminished. Jazz scene has changed. Savoy hasn't changed with the jazz scene. So they're kind of being phased out in a way from the jazz market. And they're trying to adjust on the fly by doing the more R&B, gospel-inflected stuff and doing some of the hints of the avant-garde. But anything jazz in the late 12,100s, I should say, is very rare. And the Bill Barron record, something I've always wanted, never seen one in life, got a really cool cover. If someone reissued that, I think people would buy it. It's a cool piece. Not even a guy I know a ton about, but the cover alone is enough for me to want it. And that later Savoy stuff, it's something, as I grow older, I'll probably try to collect some of that stuff as well. I do have some of it, but it's rare stuff. You don't see it. And I've searched Savoy on Discogs as a label 10,000 times probably. Just look at what's out there for Savoy, and you don't see those records post 12-150 at all. Anyway, Bill Bear number 7. Number 8 on my list is Johnny Hartman on Regent number 6048, Just You, Just Me. And this was on my episode a month and a half ago about records I'm most after, my top 5. I still haven't found this record. I don't think I've ever even had a chance to buy one. Most of Hartman's pre-Impulse Coltrane stuff, it's out there. It's not that hard to find. It's not that expensive. His Bethlehem titles, I see them really affordably, honestly. His Roost title goes for decent money, but not ever huge. This Just You, Just Me record on Regent, which is a Savoy sister label at this point, did get reissued on Savoy late 70s, early 80s with an awful cover and under the Savoy name because Regent had been retired, and I have that. But it doesn't have the charm or the cover or the feel of the original Regent Johnny Hartman. And I love Regent. There's some weird stuff on the label, some really cool stuff on the label. This being number 6048, if I remember, is right as Regent started to do some of its coolest stuff. So I want to get that one, and I think because of Hartman's fame, it would sell. And his Bethlehem stuff's been reissued. His Impulse stuff has been reissued. So I think if you put out this Savoy Regent title, people would buy it. Especially if it was, $20. I'm a big Johnny Hartman fan, period. So I want that to be the completest that I am. Number 9, Lucky Thompson, Lucky Strikes. And this is not the prestige title of that name. This is the transition title of that name, which corresponds with a European, I think it's on Disc Vogue, but there was a European release at the same time of this Lucky Strikes. And I think it's actually a European sourced recording because Lucky was over there for a long time. Transition, the small little label out of Boston, issues it at that time. And Transition records are tough to come by. You can find the Donald Byrd stuff because the Japanese reissued it. You can find the Doug Watkins because the Japanese reissued that with a Blue Note logo, actually. But that Transition Lucky Strikes record, I can see some European pressings, but they're good money. There's some really bad looking pressings. This needs a good rendition out there with the right cover, and I think people would buy it. Lucky Thompson's a great player that deserves more light shed on him. And if again, a lot of it's about price point. You put that Lucky Thompson on Transition out there for $30. It's a lot of collectors who know who Lucky is who would be happy to swipe that up. And those Transition records are all tough to come by, and original Transitions go for big bucks. Really tough to find. Number 10 on my list, and this is a bit of a self-indulgent one for me, is the great guitar player Bill Jennings. Big fan of his work. His stuff on Prestige in the late 50s, early 60s is great. He's like sideman on a lot of important records. But he makes a record at King, probably in 54, that comes out as a 10-inch initially, and that would be number 395. And then King switches to LP in 55. It starts at 500 and starts reissuing all their backlog, so Bill Doggett and Earl Bostic and all that stuff. And this Bill Jennings gets reissued on LP as number 508. And it's called Mood Indigo, the great Ellington song. I've seen it once at auction and went for a couple $100. And it's a very self-indulgent title. I don't think the Bill Jennings stuff would have a huge following. Deep collectors like me would be like, oh, Bill Jennings reissue, cool. $20, $25, yeah, I want that. But for me, that's probably the most self-indulgent one on the list. I think those other 9 titles would all find an audience. So whoever's up there is listening, knows anybody, I think those 9 records all deserve a reissue. And I think people would buy them. My name is Dan, I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Don't forget to check out my merchandise store. There's some very cool merchandise there. This is cheap with all the different labels on them. So I got my flock of Columbias, my flock of Atlantics, my flock of Blue Notes, Prestige, Verve, Impulse, Bethlehem. It's the whole Riverside. Every sheep has a different label logo on it. It's a cool shirt. There's a lot of cool shirts and hoodies and stuff available in the merch store. Check it out. If you can't do that, you can go to my Patreon and donate a few bucks a month to help support the cause. Let me put the time and money and effort into this channel. I try to provide the best quality information that I can and make every episode as good as I possibly can. I appreciate you all. You all stay safe. We want to eventually turn this space here into a jazz bed and breakfast, lounge, resource center. And if that day comes, I look forward to welcoming a lot of you into my home And many people have chatted with me about it and said they'd love to come. So just keep that in mind. I want to make this a real meeting place for jazzophiles, especially jazz vinylophiles. But we ain't going to sit around talking about speakers and pressings. We're talking about the music, the story behind the music, what the music makes you feel, what it makes me feel. Because if you're talking about music and you ain't telling me what it makes you feel, you ain't hearing the art. A book writer, a filmmaker, if all you can talk about is the technical shit and you can't tell them what the movie made you think, what it made you feel, your gut response to it, the creator of that art's like, you kind of missed the point. I made Red Dawn so you'd learn to hate the commies. Not for you to break down film and camera angles. Like, there's a message behind art. It might not always be a message you agree with. You know, the propaganda of the 80s films is illuminating to me now as an adult, because you have to recognize it's still happening in today's media. And so who are they teaching us to hate today? And sadly, we're kind of being turned against each other, which is what Serpent always does. It destroys all the enemies of the people, and then it turns the people on itself and starts consuming its own people. And we're being torn apart: urban, rural, left, right, blue, red, gay, straight, Christian, non, immigrant, resident. It's just incessant. Black, white. You know what I mean? It's just all at each other's throats at any cost to prevent us from having the unity that it would take for our democracy to have power. Democracy requires unity, consensus, understanding of the issues. And if we're constantly debating non-issues as a smokescreen and thinking that we're being proficient in the democratic process, we're very fooled. And at that point, nation is not a thing. It's a piece of propaganda. It's a tool. Peace. I'm out.